can.
Hi SwitchUp family and welcome back to the channel. I told you it was going to be a busy one. My name's Mark Walker and today we're going to look at Bright Memory Infinite Gold Edition. Believe it or not, the original Bright Memory was created by a single Chinese developer. That was then released on Steam Early Access and was around about 40 or 50 minutes long. Bright Memory Infinite involved more people but essentially recreated the original game with more gameplay, more bosses and a new story. What was I saying about these first person shooters? They're like buses. We had absolutely none, or at least very few, and then 3 parkour-based, solid first-person shooters released within, the space of a month. Is it a shining example on Switch, or infinitely less bright than my memory of its original release? Well, let's find out.
But you're too late. Once I finish pouring this primordial...
The narrative centres around Shelia, who I accidentally read as Sheila for most of the game, as she's tasked with stopping an evil organisation from essentially destroying the world through the use of an ancient relic. And the power in question allows for the reanimation of the dead, as well as the recreation of the world itself through what looks to be its total annihilation in a giant black hole. Pretty standard action fare that you don't need to pay a huge amount of attention to, but comparative to its original release in Bright Memory, Infinite adds in a number of new story elements. Not only does Shelia have standard weapons, which can be quick switched on the fly and have secondary fire modes, oh and yes, she has gyroscopic aiming, activated either when you're aiming down the scope or for those who prefer all the time. Hallelujah. But she also has a number of supernatural abilities. She can pull enemies towards her scorpion style before exploding them or slicing them to pieces with her katana. She can block and deflect incoming enemy fire back at its owner, and she can also use her experience points to level up in a number of different skills. And it's with no small amount of irony that I realised, although not the longest, Bright Memory Infinite does more creatively speaking for first-person shooters in its first 10 minutes alone than something like Call of Duty has done in its last 10 years. No hate on COD, let's not start an argument, but this combination of both first-person shooter, some melee elements, which we have seen done before, is made whole with a solid parry mechanic. If you can time it right, she can stagger foes and open them up for multiple strikes. There's almost a full stamina-based combat system underneath the hood, and it works surprisingly well. There's a built-in partial lock-on mechanic, which when you're playing from this perspective, stops you from losing track of the enemy when it's those one-on-one moments. Some comparisons might be made to games like Crysis. Certainly some inspiration with the way that your character has these abilities can be seen, and Shelia can jump, double jump, wall run, and pull herself up on ledges. She gets a grapple gun, but unlike Crysis, which is a sandbox environment, this is very much a linear experience, and it tends to use a combat-gated system, that being you have to defeat all the enemies within an area before you can progress. I did notice a couple of small bugs as well where I couldn't find the last enemy, and they just pop up randomly. When killed, you could suddenly move on. As well as standard ammo, you can switch to the special type and you'll find it scattered irresponsibly all over the stage. A little gripe I had was with the way that ammo's collected. Rather than simply allow you to run over it, you have to hold down the Y button. I know that doesn't sound like a problem, but it was a bit hit and miss. Sometimes you could tap it and it would pick it up, and other times you kind of had to find just the right spot. Now the shooting itself is exceptionally well delivered. The implementation of gyroscopic aiming is almost perfect here, and you can tweak every axis, every sensitivity, and have things running just the way you like them. Aside from the standard combat sections, there are also a few boss fights. I found some of these really exhilarating, although they did emphasize a few weaknesses in the AI scripting. It was quite easy, for example, to cheese an enemy and lock them into a set position. I mean, don't do it, you're spoiling your own fun, but yeah. The final movement mechanic is a dodge move. This allows you to quickly dash out of the way of incoming enemy attacks. From a control standpoint, it's one of the most responsive first-person shooters I've played, and it's rare that you'll feel like you can't evade what's coming. Over the 7 or so large stages, in typical action movie style, there are lots of different set pieces, including driving a vehicle and fighting on the wings of a plane. In an unusual way, there are similarities to No One Lives Forever, a great first-person game from back in 2000, and that's a real compliment. Once you've completed the game, which won't take much more than 2 or 3 hours, you can continue from the beginning with all of the equipment and unlocks that you've gained. And it's definitely worth a couple of playthroughs, but don't expect to find multiple routes or lots of new discoveries. It's a real shame that we haven't got more multiplayer options on Switch when it comes to first-person shooters, and there's no exception here. This is single player only. You can change your costume and choose different skins for your guns, but that's about it. Gameplay is solid, if a little repetitive, and it was a bit too on rails for my liking at times. times. That scores 15 out of 20. The controls are excellent and only suffered when the locker mechanic got a bit wonky. They score 18 out of 20. Visually, the Unreal 4 engine is looking remarkably good. I have a sneaking suspicion they might be using the new AMD Fidelity FX Super Resolution technology, which essentially means they're rendering at a lower resolution and then that tech upscales the image to look almost native. You notice it especially on text, as it never quite looks right, and sometimes you get this almost dissolving effect on enemies. Overall though, when in motion, it looks brilliant, and the 30 frames per second is maintained almost constantly. It isn't always, but there is also a very nice option of being able to enable VSync. This tightens up the frame pacing. Now personally, I have this off, and I know that might offend a few people, but the input latency is ever so slightly better without VSync on. And sorry if I'm talking mumbo jumbo, VSync is simply vertical synchronization, aka tying the frame rate to the refresh rate and keeping everything running smoothly. Or that's the idea. If the game can't meet the frame rate for VSync to work correctly, then you can have all kinds of stutters and issues. There's also a field of view slider here, which is nice, but I kept that at standard. I didn't feel like increasing that was necessary, as it was quite high as standard, and they included a text size option. I have to take my hat off for that. This is in no way a game for children. There's lots of blood splatter, there's decapitations, the slicing off of limbs, and even a stealth section involving a meat cleaver. The on-screen carnage is heightened by the audio, which again, for the size of the team, is surprisingly good. It's a great handheld experience, and for me it shows the importance of a quality screen on a handheld device. Currently owning the Steam Deck, despite that being much more powerful, there are times where my Switch version is almost comparable just because the screen is so solid. Level load times take a little longer than I would like, but these aren't excessive. Visuals and performance score 16 out of 20, and the audio also scores 16 out of 20. Bright Memory Infinite Gold Edition is £16.74, or your regional equivalent. Now, what makes it gold? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's the new costumes or some of the weapon skins. It's a reasonable price for a fun game, but at 2 or 3 hours with not a huge amount of replayability, it just feels a bit high again. Maybe 12 or 13 pounds, even 9.99s that it sells like hotcakes. I don't know. It's decent, and I do want to support developers that are very small, that put in the time and put some of the bigger names to shame, so I'll let you be the judge. I would give value 12 out of 20.
A new world will be born.
Bright Memory Infinite is another good addition to the ever-growing library of first-person shooters on Nintendo Switch. What we really need now are some multiplayer options, and with good gyro, you can be quite competitive. It gets a SwitchUp score of 77%. Let me know in the comments, have you been looking forward to this? Are you a fan of FPS? And are you as pleased as I am about gyro? GG to the guy readying up. Gyro doesn't help in the comments. I can see you. I'm ready for it. A thanks to our patrons and to everyone who enjoys the content. And as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!